I will not tolerate such behaviour. If you want to go out now, but if you stand again, I will order you out. Make your mind up. Either shut up and get out.
Britain just witnessed the unthinkable. A sitting Prime Minister dragged out of Parliament live, on camera, after completely losing control in a showdown with Nigel Farage. History was made today, but not the kind Keir Starmer wanted. This wasn't just politics as usual, this was a political earthquake. And the shockwaves are only beginning. Stay tuned because the fallout could reshape the future of British democracy. The day had started like any other Wednesday in Westminster. Prime Minister's questions were scheduled for noon, and the chamber was packed to the rafters. MPs from every party filled the green benches. The cameras were rolling. Journalists leaned forward in the press gallery, ready to capture the latest verbal jousting between the government and its critics. Nobody, not a single person in that chamber, expected that the next 60 minutes would make political history. At precisely 12:15, Nigel Farage rose to his feet. The Reform UK leader had been preparing for this moment for weeks. In his hands, he carried documents, leaked reports, and immigration statistics, evidence that he claimed would expose the government's failures. But this wasn't the typical Farage performance. There was no shouting, no waving of papers in dramatic fashion. His voice was calm, measured, deliberate. Every word landed like a hammer on stone. "Mr. Speaker," Farage began, his tone cutting through the murmurs of the chamber. "The Prime Minister promised to stop the boats. Instead, we've seen record numbers crossing the Channel. Over 45, zero illegal arrivals this year alone. Deportation flights cancelled. Hotels costing taxpayers billions. And now leaked documents show secret negotiations with Brussels to rejoin EU migration schemes. Each fact was a blow, not to the government's policies, but to the credibility of the Prime Minister himself. On the Labour benches, faces grew pale. MPs shifted uneasily. This wasn't the usual theatre of half-truths and dodged questions. This was a systematic takedown, delivered with surgical precision. Farage didn't gloat, he didn't smirk, he simply pressed on. The British people voted for control of our borders. They voted for sovereignty. What they received instead was betrayal disguised as compassion. When will the Prime Minister admit his policies have failed? The chamber froze. For a moment, the silence was thicker than any noise. And then, something extraordinary happened. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, didn't wait for the Speaker to recognise him. He didn't stand calmly, as parliamentary rules require. Instead, he erupted from his seat, face flushed with anger, finger trembling as he jabbed it toward Farage. "How dare you?" Starmer shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his rage. "How dare you stand there and lecture this government about compassion when all you do is spread hatred and division?" Gasps filled the chamber. Veteran MPs, hardened by decades of political brawls, sat in stunned silence. This was not politics as usual. This was not debate. This was raw fury unleashed in the heart of British democracy. But Starmer wasn't finished. He pushed forward, his voice rising with every word. "You have no right to speak about British values when you've spent your entire career tearing this country apart. You are a disgrace to this chamber." Even the notoriously rowdy backbenchers didn't dare interrupt. On the Conservative side, jaws dropped. On the Labour side, horror spread like wildfire. This wasn't passion. This was a meltdown, a Prime Minister unravelling before the nation's eyes. Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle rose immediately, his voice booming through the chamber. The Prime Minister will resume his seat and address the chamber appropriately. But Starmer ignored him completely. He was still shouting, still pointing, still consumed by fury. Spittle flew from his lips as he gestured wildly, his face an alarming shade of red. For the first time in modern history, the Speaker invoked Standing Order 43, the rarely used parliamentary rule that allows him to remove any member who refuses to maintain order, even the Prime Minister himself. Two security officers approached. Cameras captured every moment as Britain's most powerful man refused to sit down, refused to calm down, until he was physically escorted out. And in that instant, the authority of the Prime Minister evaporated. What had begun as another day of political sparring ended in humiliation on live television, the most shocking meltdown in parliamentary memory. The silence that followed Keir Starmer's removal was deafening. For a few seconds, Parliament itself seemed frozen in disbelief. You could hear nothing but the shuffle of feet, the faint clicking of cameras, and the heavy breaths of MPs who had just witnessed history. A sitting Prime Minister escorted out of the chamber like an unruly backbencher. It was a moment no one had rehearsed for. A moment no one expected, and yet it was now etched into the history books. Within minutes, the outside world caught up. Clips of the expulsion flooded social media almost instantly. On Twitter, the hashtag #PMThrownOut began trending globally. TikTok was flooded with edited versions of the footage, some serious, others mocking, some already set to music. Memes spread faster than the news bulletins themselves. What had once been the secure image of a serious, disciplined leader had been reduced to a viral meltdown replayed millions of times. The political consequences were immediate. Flash polls released just hours after the incident painted a brutal picture. Starmer's approval ratings collapsed by double digits, plunging more than 15 points in a single day, the sharpest single-day drop in modern British politics. In Labour's traditional heartlands across the North and Midlands, voters phoned into local radio shows with rage and disbelief. One caller from Manchester summed it up in words that went viral: "If he can't control himself in Parliament, how on earth can he control the country?" Labour MPs, normally quick to defend their leader in the face of criticism, fell into stunned silence. WhatsApp groups of backbenchers lit up with panicked messages. Senior figures, once fiercely loyal, began asking the unthinkable: is Keir Starmer still fit to lead? Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, was reportedly furious, telling allies that Starmer had embarrassed the party on the world stage. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage and Reform UK wasted no time in seizing the moment. Their membership website crashed from the sheer number of new applications. Donation links failed under heavy traffic. Local Reform branches reported queues of people wanting to sign up in person. Farage himself, ever the tactician, avoided gloating. Instead, he addressed the nation from outside Parliament. Calm, controlled, even sympathetic in tone, he said, "What we saw today wasn't passion, it was panic. Britain deserves leadership, not tantrums." His speech was clipped and shared across every platform, with one version on YouTube surpassing 10 million views in less than 24 hours. The contrast could not have been sharper. On one side, a prime minister losing control in front of the cameras. On the other, a challenger appearing measured, unflappable, almost statesmanlike. Commentators called it one of the most devastating moments of political optics in modern times. The international response only compounded the damage. French President Emmanuel Macron's office issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern over political stability in Britain. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, asked about the incident at a press conference, said simply, "Steady leadership is important in uncertain times." American networks ran the footage on a loop. CNN labeled it a constitutional crisis in the making. The New York Times headline read, "British PM ejected from Parliament in unprecedented scenes." Back in the UK, the media response was just as brutal. Even Labour-friendly newspapers struggled to defend Starmer. The Guardian described it as a moment of madness. The Mirror's front page asked bluntly, "What have you done, Keir?" Across television, body language experts analysed Starmer's gestures, psychologists speculated about stress, and comedians mocked him on late-night shows. But behind the headlines and the memes was something far more serious: a collapse in trust. Polling by major firms showed confidence in Britain's political system plunging to historic lows. Only 23% of Britons said they trusted Parliament to act responsibly, the lowest figure ever recorded. Voters saw not just a prime minister cracking under pressure, but a political establishment incapable of stability. For Labour, the damage control efforts failed immediately. Spin doctors tried to reframe Starmer's meltdown as a passionate defence of government policy. Focus groups rejected the narrative outright. Former Labour voters called it embarrassing, unprofessional, even dangerous. The phrase "unfit to lead" appeared again and again. Meanwhile, Reform UK's surge in support showed no signs of slowing. Regional polls suggested the party was now overtaking Labour in traditional working-class constituencies. At rallies, Farage would play the footage of Starmer's meltdown on giant screens before asking the crowd, "Is this the leadership you voted for?" The answer, shouted back by thousands, was always the same: no. The fallout wasn't just a momentary embarrassment, it was a political earthquake, one that shattered Starmer's authority and redrew the political map in real time. What should have been just another Wednesday in Westminster had become the beginning of the most serious leadership crisis Britain had seen in a generation. The dust may have settled in the chamber, but the storm outside Westminster is only just beginning. A Prime Minister physically removed from Parliament is not just a viral clip, not just a bad day at the office, it's a constitutional earthquake. And the aftershocks are already rattling the foundations of British politics. The question on every lip tonight is simple: what happens next? Inside the Labour Party, panic has set in. Emergency meetings have been called, with MPs trading messages late into the night. Senior figures who once praised Keir Starmer's calmness under pressure are now whispering about succession. Potential leadership rivals Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Yvette Cooper, David Lammy are suddenly being spoken of as serious alternatives. For the first time since Starmer became leader, the once unthinkable question is being openly asked: is it time to replace him? The party's private polling paints an even darker picture. Focus groups describe Starmer as unstable, unhinged, and weak. Some lifelong Labour voters have already said they would never back the party again while he remains leader. The reality is clear. Labour is bleeding trust, and it may not be able to plug the wound while Starmer is still at the helm. The Conservatives smell blood. Rishi Sunak, desperate to revive his own struggling leadership, has seized the moment. Standing before the cameras, he declared, "A Prime Minister who cannot control himself cannot control the country. This government has lost all authority and must go." His call for an immediate vote of no confidence might once have been dismissed as opportunism, but in the current climate, it carries weight. Tory strategists believe they now have the momentum to force Labour onto the defensive or even into an early general election. But it's not just Labour and the Conservatives recalculating. Reform UK has suddenly been catapulted from the fringes into the mainstream. Polling shows them neck and neck with Labour in several working-class constituencies, and in some cases even ahead. Nigel Farage's calm, almost presidential press conference is being hailed as the speech of his career. It has given Reform something it has never truly had before: the image of credibility. For the first time, voters are imagining a Britain where Farage isn't just a protest voice, he's a potential Prime Minister. The constitutional implications are even more dramatic. Scholars are asking whether a Prime Minister ejected under Standing Order 43 can realistically continue governing. Does the Speaker now hold power to effectively suspend the head of government? Has a precedent been set that weakens the authority of Number 10 itself? Legal debates are already raging across TV panels and academic journals. Some are calling for a formal inquiry into whether Starmer's conduct breached the ministerial code, an investigation that could accelerate his downfall. Internationally, Britain's allies are nervous. The footage of Starmer's meltdown and removal has played on repeat from Washington to Berlin, from Paris to Canberra. Britain, once admired for its stability, suddenly looks fragile. Trade partners are questioning whether the UK has the leadership to negotiate deals. Commonwealth nations, who still see Britain as a model of parliamentary democracy, are expressing quiet alarm. Diplomatically, Britain is bleeding credibility, and every day of silence from Number 10 makes it worse. Then there is the public mood: restless, angry, and increasingly volatile. Protests have already been announced by grassroots groups calling for Starmer's resignation. Reform UK rallies are swelling in size and energy. In pubs, workplaces, and online forums, ordinary Britons are asking if the political system is broken beyond repair. Trust in institutions, already battered by years of Brexit and leadership churn, has collapsed further still. So, what happens next? Several scenarios are possible. Starmer could attempt to cling on, hoping the storm passes. He could reshuffle his cabinet, fire advisors, and frame the meltdown as a one-off moment of human emotion. But the odds are stacked against him. Once the public sees a leader lose control in such a dramatic fashion, the image is almost impossible to erase. Alternatively, Labour MPs could move quickly to replace him, triggering a leadership contest that plunges the party into weeks of chaos. Or, under mounting pressure, Starmer himself could resign, bowing out before he's forced. The most dramatic scenario? A snap general election, one that could upend the entire political landscape and hand Nigel Farage the opportunity he spent decades chasing. One thing is certain: the old order has been shattered. Keir Starmer's meltdown was not just a personal failure, it was a symbolic collapse of authority. What comes next could redefine British politics for a generation. Will Labour salvage its future? Will the Conservatives regain their grip? Or are we watching the birth of a new political force in Nigel Farage and Reform UK? So what do you think? Is this the end for Keir Starmer and the start of a Nigel Farage comeback? Or just another wild chapter in Britain's never-ending political drama? Let me know down in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because the next twist in this story could break at any moment.